Do you love your monkey or do you love turntables and tea? I'm Charlie.
And I'm Corey.
And if you couldn't tell from the intro, this week we will be discussing George Michael's Faith, his debut solo album, and a perfect time to be doing it because just a few days ago, George Michael was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sadly, posthumously. That's very unfortunate, but he is now in there, and he was even inducted by his Wham bandmate Andrew Ridgeley. Couldn't think of a better person to induct the guy.
That's super cool. We didn't even talk about it before we got in here. Did you watch any of the ceremony?
I have watched clips online. I did not sit through the whole thing, and the replay, it's over 4 hours long. I'm not sitting through all of that. That's too much, I'm afraid. But I have seen some of the photos and highlights, and I always like to look at that stuff. That's always very cool.
It's not in my news feed as much as I thought it would be. I got to go search it out. I actually forgot it was last weekend.
Yeah.
What was it, Sunday?
It was. It aired on Friday night.
Oh.
Yeah, I wasn't sitting through all 4 hours of that. I'm not. No, because that's just too much padding. There's no need for all of that, in my opinion. But
yeah, did you get to see the final jam?
no, not yet. I haven't watched that.
Me neither.
No. But
I'm excited to see a few things on there, especially the Missy Elliott stuff, the Rage stuff.
yeah, there's yeah, it is. It was a pretty diverse class this year of artists, I have to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of them this year was none other than Mr. George Michael. And when it came to picking albums, just seeing this list, it's like this is a diverse group of people, but I knew this was what I needed to do. It's been a real while since we've done an 80s album, specifically an 80s pop album. So and that is my, even though I wasn't alive in the 80s, it is my comfort zone in many ways to discuss 80s pop. So really excited to be doing this, and this one was a treat to discuss and to research, and really looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is a wild one, man. So many memories, and I was only 6 years old, but like it was that much in the public eye, in the American public eye, but in the public eye of the world. And there's such iconic images and such iconic sounds that definitely come off this album.
Yeah, especially in the American. Oftentimes with British artists, you hear that success in their home country was most overwhelming, but actually this time it was the United States where this album had its greatest success easily.
I mean, I know he's come out and I'm paraphrasing, but coming out of the Wham, he was saying out of the Wham, coming out of Wham, coming out of Wham, he was saying that he wanted and believed. And I think it's very important to focus on that, or at least in my opinion, his belief of himself to be up there in the ranks of Prince and Michael Jackson, and that's his own words. So it's a wild thing to see. But yeah, coming into the American audience, this probably will be my first, not probably, this will be my first hot tea take. I feel, in my opinion, it has a lot of Americanness in it on purpose, because I think he really wanted to put his foot in that door, so to speak, coming into this album, especially by himself.
Yes, and with that being said, I think this is a good time to get into the whole background of it. So in 1986, George Michael and his bandmate Andrew Ridgeley ended their incredible tenure as the duo Wham. They had major hits in that time period. They ended their run with a concert at Wembley Stadium in London, to a sold out crowd. So
saw that.
Yeah, that was serious stuff, but the split was completely amicable. Andrew Ridgeley knew that his partner was really ambitious and wanted to do stuff outside of the Wham box. And a couple of the Wham singles were actually billed as George Michael's solo singles, even though they were recorded during that time, which is a bit confusing. But that is how it was done, actually. But yeah, George Michael did want to get out of that, and he did want to appeal to an American audience. He especially wanted to go more into the realm of R&B soul music specifically, rather than just the straight up pop of Wham, which many saw as very bubblegum, which was easy to do with a song like Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. But he really felt he wasn't taken seriously. But he knew that he was a serious musician. He was not just a teeny bopper guy. He was a serious songwriter and musician. And it's just so crazy to think, because those Wham songs, even if they seemed lightweight, those songs have held up in many ways, and they're the fact that a couple of them continue to be so popular to this day, I think says a lot about strong song composition.
Yeah, and I might be speaking out of turn here because I don't know the ins and outs, but this is him stepping away from that cookie cutter machine driven boy group, boy duo. Maybe I'm wrong. I didn't have them as being writing and producing their own stuff during Wham. Maybe they did.
He did. He did write
Yeah.
almost all of the songs during Wham.
Well, then I take it back. That's amazing, and it's good to see him come outside of that. It's neat. We get so many of these, and they're always unique. But we get so many of these where we see these artists that are in larger groups, find themselves and stake a claim on their own, which is I would have to imagine one of the hardest things, scariest things to do. Because for anybody who doesn't know Wembley is like the equal of going out playing Madison Square, or what I'm saying?
Bigger
like,
than Madison
Square.
Well,
yeah, of course, seat wise, but I'm saying like in an American mindset, Wembley Stadium is the premier stage for many different high level things. It's a big deal. So going out on top like that and staking your claim by yourself has to be a super daunting experience.
Yes, it was. And even though George did write the songs in Wham, some with Andrew Ridgeley, they had a specific style that that was what they were doing. And it was reflective of where George Michael was when he wrote these songs. But being in his early 20s, he was evolving, and he was getting other ideas that just didn't fit in that Wham box, because these two men had created. Because they did make pop songs. They made this stuff. Like their first hit single was called Wham Rap. That was the name of the song. Like
Wham Rap 86. I know
that was the remix.
Oh, okay.
That's the remix.
And I'm getting off on a tangent, and shame on me for not knowing. I will be the first to apologize, to look at those guys and be like, they're two good looking guys, and it's an easy, they're talented dude, but it's an easy machine piece. So it's good to hear that,
it is.
That's not the case,
Yeah, they were definite sex symbols. Not hard to see why, but yeah, if you do want to learn more about Wham, actually, I highly recommend the Netflix documentary about them that came out this year, Wham. It actually is narrated by both George and Andrew. Archive clips are used of George Michael, of course, but any interest in them at all, do watch it. I think you'll come away learning a lot about the two. I know I knew stuff that I'd never learned before, even as an 80s pop nerd that I am.
Super interested.
Yeah, definitely check that out. But we are here to discuss that breakaway from Wham. And this was being built up. Actually, his first real post-Wham single was a duet with the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin, which was I Knew You Were Waiting for Me. And that was a #1 hit, big deal. But it definitely signified that this was somebody who really wanted to be taken seriously and wanted to set himself up for greatness, especially by going toe-to-toe with living music royalty.
He's got some balls on him. I'll tell you that from what I've learned reading and going through, he definitely believes in himself. I'm going to keep going back to that because in my opinion, that sings throughout this.
Yeah, that was where he was. And the first couple of songs for the album were recorded not long after the final Wham concert. But then things went on hold for a bit, and recording of the album really picked back up in February of '87 and continued over the next few months. Um, but and really the era kicked off interestingly with a soundtrack single that ended up being on the album, but it was initially just a soundtrack song. But in the fall of '87, this album was released in October of that year, and the response was pretty quickly very warm, actually. I mean, people were definitely ready to hear George Michael do what he had to do. And he did reach out to an audience that he hadn't had before, not just the Wham teen girl audience. There were adults listening to these songs and enjoying them. And I mean, it just was an immediate iconic album, an image. It's now sold over 25 million copies worldwide, which is crazy. And in the United States, he wanted to get that American audience. It worked. This was actually the #1 album of 1988. He outsold Michael Jackson, Prince, and many, many others. None of them could be topped by this.
Yeah, he was coming on the heels of Bad, and then he's what, 4 or 5 years after Purple Rain. So yeah, that's wild, man. Good for him.
I mean, yeah, this George Michael even said, I know a lot of people are going to compare this to Bad because it came out only like 2 months after Michael Jackson's Bad. But he said, like, but I think they're very different albums, which I would say he's correct about that. They definitely are different in sound in a lot of ways. I think George Michael has a lot more in common with Prince than he does Michael Jackson.
Yeah. And we talked about it a little bit before we jumped on, but especially him being in the studio writing the meat and potatoes of this album, if not the whole album, as he goes along with session players and really realizing the sound as it happens, which I thought was a really neat way. I went at this one a little bit different and ended up reading just initial reading on the wiki about it, and I was blown away by that, like that he's writing and producing and sitting inside of this, just letting the music happen, was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That was what he was doing. And yeah, it obviously paid off for him very nicely. But the funny thing was about it all, he wanted that acclaim and fame, but then he didn't want it. In the middle of this album cycle, he didn't want it anymore, and he retreated in a lot of ways after this. But when you get this big, you never go away completely. I mean, this is a career-defining album that anybody is lucky to have. Like, any artist would be lucky to have an album as successful as this. You can say you're an icon with just this album. He can do that because this was such a successful release.
He definitely can. And he was already dealing with that mindset and talks, we get to talk about that a little bit on this album. But one of the quotes that I took away from him is he was saying, and I'll paraphrase it just for the sake of the conversation, but he was saying how he was with somebody and didn't realize how much he had accomplished yet. It hadn't really set into him, just regardless of life and prior to this album. But it's wild to see that take its toll. I'll play devil's advocate. You didn't think this was going to blow up, and you're already part of Wham. You're already almost, I'll say, a full-fledged sex symbol. But then you write an album like this, and you, as much belief in himself as he had, I feel like you should have saw that coming.
I mean, yeah, but I will say this, in hindsight, it is in some ways kind of, in a way, it's surprising how successful some of this was, because in a lot of ways, it doesn't sound like everything else that was popular in 1987 and 1988. This really does stick out from the pack in a lot of ways. One way this was really signified to me, actually, just a bit ago, one column I've mentioned here before is on Stereo Gum. It's called The Number Ones, written by Tom Bryhan. And he goes through every number one hit in US history on the Hot 100. And right now he's in 2011, but just looking through, Faith had 4 number one hits. And these songs really did not they're in between all of these songs that sound so different. I mean, 2 of these songs, a couple of these singles were replaced at number 1 with songs by Rick Astley. Never Gonna Give You Up. This is not that kind of album at all. But in the long run, it's helped him because this album has held up. It doesn't sound as dated as a lot of the hits of 1987 and 1988. And at times you could even say he goes for that kind of evergreen, timeless sound.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I'm trying not to give away too much, but for me, that comes from I have to say, love or his infatuation with the American style rock and roll sound, or rockabilly almost in some ways. At that time, that's a timeless sound, in my opinion. And I think that's, again, in my opinion, I think that's where a lot of this timelessness comes from. Not to take away from him at all, but for me, that's where a lot of this hits.
No, it does help with that. We will discuss that when it applies, most definitely. But yeah, and it won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year, and the acclaims just continued. It was number 151 on the most recent Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums list, and before that, it was like below 450 on the 2 previous editions. But this new edition, it moved way up because of just how well it's held up, and I think its influence and how beloved these songs are to this day.
That's a wild jump, and I saw that and I was like, I wonder why. And I wondered if it was because of the remixed, re-release stuff. Regardless, it's a wild jump. That I'm curious to see why Rolling Stone says, okay, it went from low to almost in the top 100.
There were different people voting on it. I think it's that simple. Okay. Including younger folks than who did it before, who've seen this album's influence.
That's cool. I like that answer. That makes me feel better.
Yeah. And it's not inaccurate, I don't think. And so with that being said, I'm ready to talk about these songs. I really had a fun time diving into these. So
yeah, let's get at them.
Most definitely. So the song begins with the title track, which is Faith, obviously. And it begins with an organ, which is, see, that's what I mean when saying this does not sound like other 80s hits. Because not many other 80s hits I can think of that have an organ intro. But funny enough, that organ is actually playing the Wham hit Freedom. This idea was because of, I actually read the 33 and a Third book that came out last year on this album. And really good read if you're interested in this album. They talk to almost all of the musicians that participated in this album. They talked to a lot of them. And one of them, the keyboardist, Chris Cameron, he actually compared Freedom to the work of the classical composer Gustav Mahler, which made George Michael really happy because, like, that's a serious compliment and shows that you're not just a pop flop artist. And so he put it on this cathedral organ setting, and that's what they did to start off the song. But then we go into that rockabilly sound we were mentioning, which is known as the Bo Diddley beat. And it's throughout this whole song. And that's what I mean when saying this. It has, because of that, even though it doesn't sound like the other hits of the day, that lack of synths and all, it helps the song sound very timeless, I think.
It does. It's perfectly put together inside. I'll use the word that I wrote in my notes. It's immaculately put together inside of its production, inside of this composition, because it could have easily been a throwaway thought Like, let's do a little rock and roll, rockabilly, Bo Diddley riff here and see how it goes. But it's fully realized, and why it's a hit. You even get what you don't get a lot on this album. You even get a little solo break here where the instrumentation gets to, show its chops. You don't get that a lot throughout this album. So it's another neat nod to rock and roll, in my opinion, here. But hell of a way to start an album, especially an album where you're making your debut, so to speak. So really neat way to get at it here.
Yeah, and this was in many ways the kickoff of this era. This was released as a single with the album's release, and a massive hit, and it was number one several in 6 countries, including the US, and ended up being the number one single of 1988 for the United States.
And it had an iconic video.
Yeah.
This is MTV staple this is the kind of memories I'm talking about when I was like 6 at this point. But you'll never forget that video because it was so white background, Rickenbacker jukebox, him in cowboy boots, leaning up
leather
on it.
Jacket.
It was iconic is the only word I keep going back to.
Yeah, it's an image that will always be associated. It is one of those top MTV era videos that people still remember to this day. For sure. And now I do have to ask you, maybe this is another memory for you. In the late 90s, this was pretty infamously covered by a band called Limp Bizkit.
I remember.
What did you think of that?
I mean, Fred had a cool yell on it. I thought it's a good song, and it has a rock and roll stability that we've already touched on. So it always made sense, I guess, as a cover. I don't know. I used to make fun of it.
As you should.
In all honesty, it's not really composed terribly, though.
Well, that's because it's a good song.
Exactly. Yeah.
They should stick to breaking.
I haven't listened to it for a while, so
I think they should have stuck to breaking stuff.
But it hit. I mean, it was a crowd pop. It was all even though it caught crap. It was a pop. I've seen Limp Bizkit live twice, and both times people want to get down on it. I mean, Fred put his all into it too, but all of them did on that. It was just a weird contrast from what you would expect from them. I mean, look at what they're doing now. He's in full old man gear doing crazy dad stuff. So they've always been a wild bunch, but yeah, it was not my favorite back then, I must say.
He had to calm down a bit over time. Come on.
Yeah. They're gimmicky, so it works for them.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad I was very young during the Limp Bizkit era, not gonna lie.
They got cool riffs, man. They're just I use the word gimmicky in a very respectful tone. They're not the worst band in the world by any means.
No.
Wes Borland is a fucking guitar genius. But I mean, we'll have to do Limp Bizkit one day.
2024 on Turntables and Tea, Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, not the Hot Dog album though. I'm talking about early Limp Bizkit. So hear them before they started getting crazy.
But speaking of cool riffs, I think the second song here has a very cool Middle Eastern synth riff. Father Figure. This was actually originally envisioned as a dance track. But when George was working on it, he just wanted to hear something in the mix, cut the snare out, and it created something kind of dreamy. So he made it a ballad, and it's just it does have this Middle Eastern synth riff in it, and it actually, this is crazy. It sounds like it has a gospel choir. It's only 2 backing vocalists on the song, which is insane. And in that column I mentioned, the number ones, Tom Braham wrote that Father Figure is, quote, a love song, but it's a love song that hints at transgression, at role play, and shifting power dynamics. Michael sings about wanting to become the most important person in someone's life. He's a romantic, but he doesn't sing about wanting to be a lover. Instead, he wants to be a father figure, a preacher, a teacher, unquote. I mean, that I couldn't have said it better myself. It is that love song that, yeah, it's a transgressive love song. And obviously, George Michael was later outed as being gay 10 years after this album was number one. But yeah, it's been very much seen as a queer love song because it has that forbidden element to it. But I mean, either way, this is a cool as fuck song. It means whatever you want it to mean. I love it.
Yeah, it's a super unique and original sound right here on track two, which I love. We had something that's rooted in the American listeners. We had a first track that was rooted inside of our subconscious listener, but this next one really makes you stop what you're doing and enjoy it, and rightfully so. It builds up inside of it at least three different times, but never goes over top of itself. And it really finds its pocket in this dreamlike composition. I read that about the snares, and I've tried to like imagine this snare in there. Of course, they've rewritten it at that point, but this is what I'm talking about. The kudos to him for being inside of this studio. You look at the personnel listing for this, and it reads like there's a giant band, but it's really him just vibing with these session musicians and finding his sound. And I'm so glad you touched on the backing vocals, because it sticks to this point of he's doing so much, he's getting so much sound out of this very minimalistic setting of himself and some session players, and he does such a great job with it in the production that you think, exactly like you said, you think he's got this at least 5-6 person gospel mini choir behind him, when in fact it's just two people. Really well done. This one sings to me a lot harder musically than Faith, and it really makes a point, in my opinion, of, hey, I'm way much more than a pretty face coming out of Wham.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is definitely a more sophisticated ballad than Careless Whisper. That's for sure. But what's crazy about this, to me, this is one of the things that's kind of shocking about how successful this is. This song is almost 6 minutes long, and usually when a song's that long, it's edited for the radio. This was not. And it still topped the charts in the United States, but actually not anywhere else. And I just have to say, America got it right, but overall, I have had enough of crime like this song not being number one in every country. That is all I am going to say about that. I do not like that. And the song has a cool video too. He's a cab driver. He's got a romance with a model, and the video actually has more views on YouTube than the Faith video.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
It is pretty wild. But yeah, I will say at the Rock Hall induction, I forgot to mention they had Adam Levine of Maroon 5 perform Faith. I'm glad nobody took on Father Figure. That would have been a real tough one to do justice for. Glad no one did.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
It's definitely a high bar.
Most definitely. But in the meantime, we're going to discuss another song not done at the Rock Hall, but for probably obvious reasons, especially if it was on Disney Plus. This one being "I Want Your Sex" parts 1 and 2. So yeah, this is the most controversial single on the album. This was the soundtrack song. The part 1 was released as a single on the soundtrack to Beverly Hills Cop 2, which is weird to think about because this song is just so outside of any movie. I feel like its whole legacy.
I don't know, man. It's for me, it hangs right there as far as it's part of its legacy as this like pure 80s like time. It's something you stick in an 80s time capsule if you want to explain the 80s, in the
Yeah.
future.
that is not inaccurate. So yeah, so this what was part one was a single, and it's a very spare funk sound, and it was very quickly compared to Prince, especially the song Kiss, which was a number one hit the year prior. I mean, there was even a critic who said he outprinced Prince, and I wouldn't say that, but here's what I will say. Actually, commercially, this was bigger than any of Prince's singles that year. Um, rightly or wrongly, it was. But yeah, the title alone kind of implied this was going to be controversial. It was banned by the BBC, except for at nighttime. Casey Kasem would not say the title on American Top 40, which I
I only
love that.
I only chuckle because I literally pictured Casey Kasem like holding his mouth when you said that.
Yeah, he had he had no problem yelling about a fucking dog dying, but wouldn't say I want your sex. Have you?
Okay.
Oh, you have to look up the clip of him going off on a rant about the dog dying.
Oh no. My man Casey Kasem. I
It
remember
is hysterical.
that. I'll have to look it up.
Oh yeah, it was from a couple years before I Want Your Sex, but it's quite funny. So yeah, but this song it did get some criticism, not just for being about sex, but some thought it was especially inappropriate during the AIDS crisis of the 80s. However, George Michael had this to say. He said, yeah, the song's about a monogamous relationship. There was even a disclaimer put in that in the video. He even well, his girlfriend at the time is heavily featured in the video, Madel Kathy Jung, and she has "explore monogamy" written in lipstick on her in the video for this. So
Yeah, I never took it as promiscuous. I mean, it literally has a line in there that says one on one is the best.
and
So, you know.
in between the chorus, he just says, "I want you."
Yeah.
Like
But I mean, if he thought he was going to be able to release this song and not get, for lack of better
he
words,
knew what he was
crucified.
doing.
Yeah, I mean, come on. You know darn right well this isn't going to play on the radio.
Yeah, but of course, surprise, surprise, the controversy got a lot of people to buy the song, and it made it the number two in the US and number three in the UK. And it was blocked from the top spot by U2's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, which what a 180 lyrically from this. I love that.
Heard.
But also a great song. But yeah, but so interestingly, the B side to the I Want Your Sex single in the summer of '87 was part two. They had subtitles. Rhythm one was Lust. That was what we heard on the radio. And Rhythm two was Brass in Love, which brings in a whole horn section, which is another facet of funk that we're getting on this song, which I really do appreciate. But on the album, we get it both together, and it's almost 10 minutes long. But I have to say the composition moves along very nicely. It doesn't stay in the same place for too long, and just having those two parts really helps it all go by very nicely. I mean, it is a bit of a it's very clearly Prince influence. But is that a bad thing? No, it's not. I mean, it's certainly not the worst Prince riff that I've heard. That's for sure.
It does, I guess. It didn't even stick in my head, and now I'm playing them back and forth, and it does. It has that Princey riff. I give it that. The radio one, the rhythm, the radio edit, the first piece for me is perfectly fine. When we get it all together here, I'm a little bit on the opposite side of the coin because it does, like you said, it doesn't stick in the same spot too long. But my criticism here is that the changes every 16 bars, they don't really do anything to elevate this composition. So when it's one piece like this and we get this 9-minute and change version here of rhythm one and two, or I'm sorry, piece one and two, it just never takes off the way I think it should, or the way it should as a composition. It changes up enough that we can see it's two different thoughts, but it stays around too long for me on this one.
I mean,
That's where I'm at.
I can kind of see what you're saying. It's not the best 10-minute song I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's no Venice bitch.
This is the flip side of doing it as it comes inside of your own head. Sometimes what you think is epic, or what you put down as an epic run, unfortunately ends up thought about too much. And again, this is a tea take from me, a hot tea take from me. I just think it's overthought. I think it's very borderline contrived when it goes into that second thought, that with the horns and all. It just, it doesn't hit for me.
Well, you know what's funny? Guess who really disagreed with you? George Michael. He really distanced himself from this song later on. He really distanced himself from this song later on, and he later said he was only really proud of the second part, actually, because he thought part one was too much of a Prince copy. He said, like, I was really enamored of him at the time, and I don't think I should have, like, been that enamored of one of my colleagues. Which such an interesting take, considering that Prince had a whole factory of proteges that were sounding like him. It's just such an interesting take, in my opinion. But I mean, I don't think he outdid Prince artistically by any means here.
No.
But it's not. I mean, it is funky. It does what it needs to do. It's not even close to being my favorite song here. But I do have kind of a funny story about this song, actually. So one night I came to karaoke with my mom, brother, and his now fiance. And funny story, a guy at karaoke sang "I Want Your Sex" in front of my mom, and she was so embarrassed to be hearing that in front of her kids.
I thought you were going to say you sang this.
No. I've done a few George Michael songs because he has those great songs to sing, but not this one. Not this one.
Yeah, just not in front of Ma.
Well, yeah, especially not in front of Ma. But no, I feel like this song is too much of a groove to really sing. You know what I mean? Agreed. At karaoke.
Agreed.
I've done Faith and Father Figure. Those are much better karaoke songs, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. It is a little bit too much of a groove, too laid back, which is crazy because I didn't remember it as a laid back groove, more so in its legend and, you know, in its legacy. It in my mind sits as this controversial song. Kudos to him for being self-conscious enough later in life to say, first part, I thought I was too Prince. I think it's being a little too hard on himself, in all honesty. I don't think it is a bitten riff. I think it is just a subgenre that he was inside of. That being said, and learning that from you, I think it would be so cool to picture what it would have been if it was just that second part, like that, those lyrics on that second part, if that all would have fit, and if he would have felt more like it was his own song. That's a wild self-conscious take on his own music. Super cool.
Yeah, most definitely. But with that being said, I think that was a good time to tell you all, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon. We're on all of them. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Turntables and Tea Podcast, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Turntables Tea. Also give us a nice review and rating. We'd really appreciate it so we can keep doing things like talking about George Michael's Faith, which we're going to continue doing with its fourth track, which is One More Try. We are back in ballad territory for this one. This one's notable. George said that he wrote and recorded this song in the span of 8 hours. In that book I read about it, the keyboard player Chris Cameron said this song was inspired specifically by two ballads from the Spinners, who were also inducted into the Rock Hall this year. The songs being "I Could Never Repay Your Love" and "Love Don't Love Nobody." He played them like on the keyboard in the studio, and George liked it and came up with this. And Yeah, he created another 6 minute long ballad, but not really like Father Figure. This one's a bit more grandiose in its sound, but it was another #1 hit. And this one, interestingly, not only did it top the Hot 100 in the US, it also topped adult contemporary and the R&B charts, which were at the time called the Black Singles charts. And that was not common for a white man to do so, and that did not happen again until 2007. That a white man would top the R&B charts.
Timberlake,
Robin Thicke,
okay,
Lost
cool.
Without You.
Heard that.
Yeah, so very, very crazy to think about. But this is another song, almost 6 minutes long, not edited for the radio. This is definitely a heartbreak ballad. He doesn't want to try at love again. The highlight of this song is really the vocal. I haven't really talked much about George Michael's vocals on the album. I mean, Father Figure is also a beautiful performance, but there's so much else going on in the song, and it's really cool that there's a lot else too. This is more of a vocal showcase. He really belts out this one, and that anguish just really comes through. You can tell it's very real and heartfelt, and that like you can just tell that. And I don't think the song's the most interesting track musically. It is a bit of a musically kind of a somewhat more standard sounding ballad from 1988. This fits in more with the hit ballads of that year than Father Figure does, but I think I can overlook that to an extent because I think the vocal is so strong and passionate.
Yeah, I'm right with you. Musically, it is what it is, and I say that with respect.
Yeah.
But showcase is the word, man. Showcase is the word. I waited to talk about it to this track, but he has such a really awesome way of dancing with his lyrics. In my opinion, he has a really great way of using these swooning lyrics, these really heartfelt lyrics, and learning how to hook them, whether they're the hook or not. It's a really, really beautiful thing that he does. And this track here, for me at least, this is really the first time where I got to see his chops all the way to, I mean, he really performs on a very high level here. All of those accolades that you just spoke of are super, super deserving in my opinion. This one is really, I mean, I straight up, like, it reminded me of like a Whitney Houston song almost when the first time I heard it, and especially the way he sang it. And I really dug that, especially coming out of that long "I Want Your Sex," where I was very, very, I'll use the word disappointed by the end because it didn't hit how I wanted it to. This one took me right back up to the ecstatic level for this album. This is, I know it's a hit for him, but this one is one that I think, at least for me, I didn't give the time of day, and now it's one of my favorites on the album.
Yeah, it's one of those hits that it was popular at the time. It has faded in popularity over the years, like in a way that the title track certainly has not. That song hasn't gone anywhere. We still hear Father Figure more than we hear this one, but this one did get performed at the Rock Hall ceremony by Carrie Underwood, which again, this is that song for that big voiced singer. Yeah. I mean, Mariah Carey did a cover of this song a while back too. It's that vocal showcase song. I mean, this is the one that your American Idol and The Voice contestants are going to do. If they're going to do a George Michael song, they'll probably be picking this one.
Makes sense. I got goosebumps when you said Carrie Underwood did this. I want to hear that.
Oh yeah, I did like her version quite a bit. I thought she did a lovely job on the song.
Very cool.
Was it, you probably would think she'd be more likely to be singing George Strait than George Michael, but
Ooh, I like that.
it it worked really well. It's actually quite lovely to listen to, and I think George himself would have been proud.
Heck yeah.
Because she's actually a huge fan of George Michael.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I love that she did that. But we're gonna move out of ballad territory and go back into the funk with Hard Day. This is the other song here where he is credited with all vocals and instrumentals, much like I Want Your Sex Part 1. Okay, yeah, if any song here sounds like Prince, it's this one. This is very like that Prince influence, but the main reason it does is those pitch shifted vocals at the pitch shifted vocals where he sounds like a woman. It's a very cool technique. He definitely did it to kind of do a duet with himself, which I think is very cool. But yeah, that idea, that technique was used in a few songs on Prince's Sign of the Times album that was also released this year. And this is the one. I really hate to be a Debbie Downer. I think this song's fine, but this is not as, it's just not as good when he does it. I'm sorry, this is not as I mean, it's not as cool as Prince doing If I Was Your Girlfriend. It's just but it does have its nice little funk to it. And this was released as a single, but exclusively to the clubs and R&B charts because and it was a top 5 dance hit. It was remixed by Shep Pettibone, who shortly after this really became more well known for his work with Madonna, which I think was at the end of the day a lot more influential than this. But I think this is a fine song. I think it's the weakest on the first side of the album, and just the Prince comparisons hurt it for me, I'm afraid.
Yeah. See, for me, it was a little bit too much Michael here. And I didn't do the bad thing at all until I got to this track. I felt like it was trying too much. The composition in the beginning of this song is so cluttered that right off the jump, his lyrics are lost inside of the well, yeah, inside of the production, inside of the way it's produced, but inside of the composition as well. And for me, that happens a lot in this song, and I don't dig it. Where you're talking about that duo stuff that I didn't even put 2 and 2 together on the Prince, but I can totally see where you're coming from. I really think it's sloppy, like sloppy, compared to everything else that's going on. Maybe I would chalk it up to the other side of the coin that I was talking about before, where you're writing by yourself and you're doing so much, and it really sounds great in your head, but it just ends up being a little too much on the plate. That's where I'm at with Hard Day. Yeah, not my favorite. I thought this was the start of the second side, which
Oh, it might be.
I think it might be. I have to look, but if it is, I say a really weak way to start that side. But if it's not, it's a really weak way to end the first side. Regardless, not my favorite on this album.
No, it is the beginning of side 2. That makes a lot more sense because I did forget that I Want Your Sex is over 9 minutes long. So obviously that took more of side 1. What am I thinking? That's what happens when you listen to this straight through with no side turning.
Of course.
Yeah, I don't own a physical copy of this album actually, which is pretty crazy to think. But unfortunately, I do think that things pick up a bit with the next song, which was not a single in any way. Hand to Mouth, which is definitely the most political song on the album. And he said that it was really a statement against conservative politicians such as Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, because this is the era of them. And it started off... he wrote it in response to the LA highway shootings in the summer of 1987. It was a series of seemingly unrelated incidents, but George was pretty disturbed by it when he was spending time in LA, and he wrote a song originally titled Gun Control. But when he went back to England, there was a shooting in Hungerford, Berkshire. And so with that, he decided, okay, maybe I shouldn't call the song Gun Control. Maybe I need to change my process here. And we got a more general political song where he kind of just showcases different people who are struggling under this current regime, living hand to mouth, as he says. Uh Honestly, I really dig this song. I think it's not just in terms of the commentary, but I like honestly, to me, it sounds a lot like In Excess. Like the vocals give me that kind of Michael Hutchence vibe, and I think he does that very well. And I love a song like this because I feel like this is the kind of song I could imagine listening to as a kid, and the social context of it going completely over my head, but still just enjoying that hook and great songcraft. It does have that going for it. Yeah, it's not the best here, but I would call this possibly the most underrated track on the album.
I can see where it's underrated. I enjoy this track. In my opinion, it should have opened the second side. As far as pacing goes, I think it would have been a really strong opener. We don't get much of a third person narrative from him as hardcore as this one goes, where he's looking at someone and talking about it. It's more of a first person that we get throughout this album, and I like that. I like this story is driven, and it never really loses my ear as a listener story-wise. And then on top of that, it's on a strong beat. So you've got these two propellers that are taking this song, and I don't think that's really one of the reasons why I love it, is because it moves together simultaneously on both levels here. It's such a cool look at the poverty of America too, with the hand to mouth. I don't necessarily see why he would even put Margaret Thatcher inside of a quote there, because he's using the words America, he's using the example America, he's using the example of Jimmy, he's using the example of the American gods. It was a really cool look into poverty, and I think it's genius again to do the hand to mouth, something that we're all familiar with as a saying, and really using it inside of this narrative. I dug this. It's definitely, if it's not a hit with his fans, then it is underrated, because this is the jam piece on side two.
Yeah, I think it's underrated as far as songs on an album that sold 25 million copies.
Heard. Yeah.
But interestingly, I think to give this story cred, one of the most well-known folk protest singers, Joan Baez, actually covered this song. I haven't heard her version, but it exists.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
It really does. Pretty wild to think about, but it makes perfect sense once you hear the song.
I also read the comparison of him being the 80s Elton John or something like that, and this is really the only song that I could be like, okay, I can see that.
Well, speaking of that, before I go on to the next song, very quick tangent here. When it comes to that Rock Hall tribute, I am really surprised and a little disappointed that Elton John was at the ceremony, for his longtime collaborator Bernie Taupin was inducted, and he was there to perform for that. He performed with a few other folks. He did not participate in the George Michael tribute. I am not thrilled about that, because he was right there. They duetted together. It was a hit duet. Really am not understanding why he was not part of that duet. I don't know if there was like a limit on how much he could perform, but that was the closest connection they had to George Michael outside of Andrew Ridgeley of all the people at that ceremony.
That's interesting. I'm curious to see why that happened.
Yeah, I'm not getting it. That is for sure. No disrespect to anybody who did perform, but that was it right there. And he could have done any of these songs justice, but I would want anybody to sing a father figure. It would have been Elton John.
Heard that. That would have been sick.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I take it back. If Elton did it, it would have been great.
Yeah.
But actually, I think Elton doing this next song could have been really fun too. One of our more rock and roll tracks here, which is track number 7, Look at Your Hands. This was one of those first 2 tracks recorded for the album in 1986, along with I Want Your Sex. And it's the only song with a co-writer. This one was co-written with David Austin, who is one of George Michael's was one of George Michael's really good friends. He knew him almost as long as he knew Andrew Ridgeley, actually, going back to grade school or middle school about that time. So since childhood. And the idea was that David Austin, he had been in a band with George and Andrew, but he was going to record this as a solo artist. But that didn't end up happening. As time went on, it was decided, nope, we're going to put it on Faith instead. And apparently David Austin was not happy about that at first, which I can kind of see, but he actually probably ended up making far more money in royalties by having his song included on Faith than he would have if he recorded it.
Yeah, I don't know enough about all that, but it seems like that was like a hey man, this is a great song, but why don't you put it on my album?
Yeah.
We can do this, and I'm gonna reach a lot more ears. I would have to think.
Yeah.
But
I mean, David Austin did end up working with George Michael a lot after this. The anger didn't last for too long, but no, this was the one I learned the most about because it's definitely not the most popular song here. It was not a single. But yeah, this was something I looked into a bit, and I think it actually makes a lot of sense because in a lot of ways this song doesn't fit in with all these songs that much. I mean, even in the book I read said they kind of were going for more of like a Rolling Stones vibe when writing the song, which I can definitely hear. And one of the guys even said, like, to make it a George Michael song, they just probably just added a lot of reverb to it to make it fit in a bit. I think it is a bit of an odd fit on the album, but I still enjoy it. I think it's very catchy. I mean, any song you put that na 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 in, it'll be stuck in your head. That's just a magic trick for a pop song, I guess you can say. Yeah, I don't think it's a classic, but I'm not gonna lie, it's gotten stuck in my head a lot this week. So yeah, not the best here, but it's not bad, I don't think.
no, stuck in the head is perfect, man. First thing I have here is earwig of a diss track here because this is really a hardcore yell at an old lover. Like, I can't believe what you're doing now, who you're with, your 2 fat kids and your drunken husband. It's a pretty hardcore song regardless. I don't think it could have fit anywhere else except right behind Hand to Mouth because you have this American mindset. And this, with that, it's so wild you said Stones because immediately, like, it definitely does. It has this Western / American sound with the keys and the horns and the whole rock and roll, but it sounds like something straight off Exile, which is pretty crazy to think in hindsight. It's not a terrible song. It really isn't. It's a very catchy tune that, like I said before, can only be right here on this album. You put this on the first half of the album, it almost sounds like you have no idea where you are.
Yeah.
But here you've made enough of a statement where you can and have this. And I like the fact that this rock and roll harkens back a little bit to the rock and roll that we heard in Faith. So it gives it another little silver lining playbook way of attaching itself to this album.
I mean, and also, in all honesty, this is probably better than a good bit of the Stones' 80s hits.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, not their best decade.
Heard.
I mean, I'm not gonna say it's better than Start Me Up, but is it better than, I don't know, Mixed Emotions? I'm thinking, yeah, possibly.
There you go.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I'm not. Don't come for me. I'm not saying anything horrible, too horrible. I promise. That's not really a. I don't think that's too much of a hot tea take.
No, I don't think that's a hot tea take at all.
No, okay. Especially since I backtracked a bit. But anyway, we're gonna go away from the Stones. We're gonna go back to the bringing in the funk with our next song, which is Monkey. Um. So he wrote this song for a friend who was struggling with a drug addiction, which monkey is a metaphor for that. It's like, do you love your monkey or do you love me? But even though it's kind of a depressing matter, it's a very upbeat club song, really. Like this is a get up off your butt and dance kind of track. But what's very interesting about this song is it it was done, but George Michael, once the album cycle was still going, it was decided that Monkey would be a single. And George Michael decided, well, not the album version. I don't think that's really single worthy. So he had heard a remix of Janet Jackson's Nasty done by that song's producers, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And he called them and asked them, like, what would you do if you were to do Monkey? And so Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis produced the single version of Monkey. Which is pretty crazy. What's interesting to me is I've heard this song a good bit on Sirius XM's 80s on 8, and it's always been the album version that's been played, not the single remix that, well, topped the charts. This was his time to do that. I mean, the number ones column even pointed out maybe the fact that they sold so many different remixes of it helped it go to number one. I don't think having a video with Paula Abdul choreographing hurt either, frankly.
Right.
But yeah, this is definitely a number one that's been forgotten quite a bit with time. It doesn't even have 10 million streams on Spotify. Which is pretty that's kind of shocking for a song that was a number one hit, but I dig it. I really do. In both the album version and the single form. I mean, is it kind of a lightweight song? Yes, but it does. I think it does the funk better than any other song here. I think this is his best funk track. And again, it's an earwig of a song. This is the one that's been stuck in my head the most. Like, why can't you set your monkey free? I love it.
I jam on this album. I mean, I'm sorry, I jam on this song here. We started the night and we started our video and you were singing this, and it took everything in me not to be like, oh my God, let's talk about this, because I wanted to save it for now. Here, hot tea take. This is as close as he comes on this album to being in the league with Michael or Prince as far as that funk goes, as far as that sound goes, that he said coming out of Wham that he was looking to be in the league with. This is, I see where you're going with lightweight, because it doesn't hit heavy funk. You know, it is very light on the ears, but this song, man, it's a banger. It gets down. And on top of that, he's talking about, you know, drug addiction, getting the monkey off your back and finally loving me. And I think he handled it really well as far as the way his lyrics went throughout this. It could have been a one note thought, and he really made it last throughout this song. This is a very, very well done song. This is up there in my, oh my gosh, what am I gonna pick for a favorite song on this album? Because this one sings, man. And this late in the album too, it's a really cool piece, a linchpin, if I will, for the second half of this album.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And when I have to say the single remix definitely helps when it comes to the Michael and Prince, because guess who Jam and Lewis first played with Prince?
I heard that.
They were in the time. So
there you go. And I have to say, I've never heard the single, and after we get off this, I want to go listen to it and see the similarities and the differences. But this is going straight off that album track. You know, it's cool to hear these self-conscious, in a good way, these, you know, these thoughts of this musician who's just evolving and evolving. We talk about the evolution of different people's sounds. It's cool to see him always chasing the next level. To reach out to producers after you've already put this, out and recorded it is a really neat thing as far as an artist. It's very selfless in making music, and I dig that.
Yes, most definitely. But we are going to move away from the funk and go to jazz, actually, with the song that ended the cassette and vinyl edition of the album, at least. Track 9, Kissing a Fool. This song actually was written in early 1985 while Wham was on tour. And George Michael knew this was not a Wham song. He knew, like, this is for when I'm not doing Wham. So, and he was right. They were not going to do a jazz pop song. And crazy, George Michael recorded his vocals for this song a cappella in just one take. But he didn't have the whole thing done. So he contacted John Altman, who had arranged a couple of jazz covers for the singer Alison Moyet, who was in the duo Yazoo, known as Yaz in the United States, but much more popular in the UK, as she was a British singer. And Altman got his people to play on this song, and we created a very nice little jazz tune that managed to make it up to number 5 on the Hot 100 as the album's final single. I think that's just kind of proof that George Michael could kind of do no wrong in the eyes of many at this point. If you could get the to get a jazz track in the top 5.
That's mind-blowing. That this was top 5. To do no wrong is an understatement, in my opinion, because this one has, for me, has a very tough time fitting here. It wasn't until I got to read the context of what it was written about and the reason why he chose that swing jazz composition, because it had a very reserved feeling to it, and he didn't, from what I took, he didn't want to say too much inside of his feelings inside the relationship inside this song. But yeah, it didn't fit at first for me, especially as the penultimate track to the album.
Okay. I mean, interestingly, this still has way more streams than Monkey, which was the number 1 hit.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. But you do know there is some serious jazz pop cred here, because Michael Bublé actually did a cover of this song in his major label debut album.
I could see that easy. It fits.
I immediately thought Michael Bublé, if he hasn't done this song, he definitely should. Of course he did.
Yeah.
He did. Yeah, I thought you'd like this song a bit more. I'm not gonna lie.
I dig it as a song. I don't mean to take anything away. Okay. I wanted to say that while we were talking about, the swing style and why it was picked. I think this has some genius behind it because of the reading that he picked that swing style for its reservation as a music style. I like this because at first it really feels tongue-in-cheek because it's in this swing style to me, but it ends up being a straight and true testimonial of his feelings, and I dig that. I don't think this is a bad track. It hits different, and it takes you for a loop at first. It's one that's grown on me.
That's a fair point. It is different at first, but it's also, I mean, it's not my go-to genre. I have heard the song before, but it's not the first thing I think of when I think George Michael, but I do appreciate it for what it is, even if it's just not what I'm looking for necessarily. Again, it's more Michael Bublé than George Michael. So, but yeah, the CD and the standard streaming edition of this ends with a song titled "A Last Request," subtitled "I Want Your Sex Part Free." This is the slow jam segment of I Want Your Sex. These were actually all combined together in a 13-minute long uh um mix called the Monogamy Mix, and I just have to say I absolutely love that remix name. Brilliant right there. I have to say this is my least favorite of the three parts of I Want Your Sex. I just I don't know. I don't dislike it, but I feel like I actually thought Kissing a Fool was a really good album closer for me. I don't think this ends the album as well. I can kind of see why this was just a bonus track. Another bad comparison, but that bonus track was "Leave Me Alone," which I think is an essential Michael Jackson track. This is much more of a bonus track than an essential George Michael track. But I mean, it's cool that he did so much with this idea. I'll give him that.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can definitely see it's something that's near and dear to him. Um,
At this time.
yeah, at this time, it I guess it makes sense as far as being a nice ribbon to tie that thought process together. As far as an album closer, it really to me is a glorified outro. You know, a bow. It's a bow to this package, and Kissing a Fool as the enders, it just has more impact because it was such a out there song as far as his stylings. So it gave you a last minute look at something, another part of him that you didn't see throughout this album and really left you thinking. We talk about that a lot, but that's important to me on an album closer. So yeah, the I Want Your Sex outro, I shouldn't say it, that's not what it's called, but it ends up being this glorified outro to me.
Yeah, I can kind of see. I definitely can see what you're saying there. Not kinda, but there we have it. Faith, one of the biggest albums of the '80s. And yeah, what a ride. Really enjoyed talking about this one.
Yeah, and it didn't even come up, but I had never listened to the album all the way through. So it was cool to really get the full experience on this. I mean, of course, I know a lot of these tracks. You would have to be living under a super giant rock not to know stuff like Faith or Father Figure, a bunch of them. I mean, there's so many singles on this, and it was in the prime of the radio play in my life. But it was cool to sit down and really go through this a bunch this week.
Yeah, most definitely. But with that being said, what is your final grade for this album?
George Michael's Faith, a really, really cool album coming out of an artist that I will say, and you guys have already heard me say that I didn't even know he had these chops. I think, not I think, this album really gives a great look at what he wants to do as a musician, what he can do as a musician. And from the start to the end, it really showcases all these little hidden pieces of himself as a musician for me. It does have times like the drawn out I Want Your Sex where it slows down a bit for me, but it doesn't really falter on an album as far as pacing goes to the point where it takes me out hardcore. I have to give this one a B.
Okay. I'm a sucker for '80s pop. I'm gonna give it a A minus.
Heard that.
There are a couple songs I don't like quite as much, but overall, I mean, there are stone cold classics here that do that make the weaker moments like not sing as much, I guess you can say. And even the weaker moments aren't unlistenable. I don't feel like I much must reach for the skip button every time, even if I wouldn't necessarily seek them out. But overall, I do think this is a classic album deserving of its acclaim. And I think it's a shame that George Michael's no longer with us, because just would have been great to have heard what else he could have come up with.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
What's your favorite song on the album?
It's tough, man. I got a few on here. I got a few. It really was between Monkey and Father Figure, and I got to go Monkey.
Okay, well that's fine because it's Father Figure for me. It was never a contest. There's a lot of great songs here, but there was never a contest. That's the one I've always gone back to. I've always loved. I loved it the first time I heard it, and I always will. I've never gotten sick of it.
I didn't share this anecdote before, but this one Father Figure was with me as a kid only because not only because, but I remember the be down like it's always been stuck in my head forever. So Father Figure definitely had some nostalgia for me.
Well, I mean, hey, it's a hard to forget song. That's
Yep.
yeah. It's one I'm very grateful for. It's such a cool song, and it's about whatever you want it to be. You know, I love songs like that where they're whatever you want it to be. Those are my kind of songs. But wow, what a wild ride we took with Faith. And this, I have no idea actually, but what did you pick as your Rock Hall album for this month, based on this year's class of inductees?
I didn't.
You didn't?
I thought we picked the Sheryl Crow album.
You no, you did. You had to decide which one.
Oh shit. Well then I gotta decide real quick. I'm sorry. I thought we decided already.
I mean,
I thought we didn't we say hold on.
there's a few you can choose from. I want you to.
I thought we had said one when we talked about it, and I
No.
was like, let's go. Well then I gotta get in there.
Or you could change your mind. You could do Missy
No.
if you want.
I don't think there's enough to talk about on a Missy album.
Fair.
Other than production and like
Yeah.
how she changed the game, but we could say we're gonna have to say that 80 times.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Rage could be fine to do. I just think it's quite a shift in between George Michael and Dolly Parton.
No, of course it is. There's good stuff to talk there, but there's not
This
anything.
isn't the time.
Yeah, no. Oh man. I mean, Tuesday Night Music was in my CD case. Oh, come on, or Tuesday Night Music. Pick for me.
Oh. My heart is telling me, come on, come on.
Yeah, let's do come on. 2002.
Yeah, that's better for me because Soak Up the Sun's nostalgia for me.
I like that. Come on. Okay.
And I think there's a Stevie Nicks connection in that album, I think, too.
I like it.
Okay. All right. So please tell us what you will be picking for your album.
This was a tough one. This was a tough one for me. I have a bunch of different artists this year. Whether it be Rage, everybody figures I'm gonna pick. Missy, same deal. But I gotta put it up there to one of my favorite ladies. We talk about my infatuation with her a bunch. So we're gonna do the 2002 album from Sheryl Crow, Come On.
A very good pick. And that one, I know that one has a connection or two to one of my very favorite ladies, Stevie Nicks, who performed for Sheryl Crow's induction. So I'm very excited to discuss that one. And it has one of the biggest and best hits of my childhood, I know. That one does.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw her this year too. I got to go back and look, but I'm almost positive 2002 was the first time I saw her live.
Yeah. I got to see her at Ocean's Calling. So
I know, man. I know.
Yeah. And she did only one song from this album, but it's the one that mattered the most. At least in our consciousness. But anyway, yes, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for setting your monkeys free and all that, keeping the faith. But next week, it's a bit cold out to be soaking up the sun. But come on. You know you're still gonna listen to us. So until then, take care of yourselves and stay safe and healthy.
Peace.